Now they're home in the U.S. And speaking out for the first time.
Did you kill Jolly Joseph?
No, I did not.
Tonight, Nightmare in Paradise. It's finally over.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Chris Wallace.
It is one of the oldest themes in literature, the innocent man accused of a crime he did not commit. For 9 long months, a rich American couple, Jim and Penny Fletcher, were imprisoned on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, accused of murder and facing the possibility of death by hanging. A representative of the U.S. Embassy said the case looked like a witch hunt. There were allegations that the Fletchers were offered a deal. In return for a bribe, they would be released. In May, President Clinton raised the couple's plight in a meeting with St. Vincent's prime minister. But the Fletchers languished in prison under punishing conditions for months, until last Friday, when after finally hearing the government's case, a judge set them free, ending what Jim Fletcher called our season in hell. ABC's John McWethy has been following this case for months. Tonight, he tells the Fletchers' remarkable story and has the first exclusive interview with them.
Praise God.
It was a stunning end to their 9-month struggle to win freedom.
We bear no ill will toward the people of St. Vincent and sincerely hope that the publicity surrounding this case will not impact negatively on relations between our countries.
Minutes before, in a packed courtroom, the High Court judge had, in essence, thrown out the case, ruling that the government of St. Vincent did not have enough evidence to send the case to a jury.
It has confirmed my confidence in our judicial system.
All along, the Fletchers had claimed the government had no compelling case against them, that the prosecution kept trying to delay their day in court because of this.
And the moment in the courtroom when you realized that this judge was going to...
Started crying to say I had hold Jim's hand. I was going to break his fingers. Yeah.
For the first time in months, Jim was able to hug his 2 oldest daughters.
You know, we're not letting you out of our sight. You're coming to Chicago. And you're never leaving.
281 days after Jim and Penny were arrested, they left St. Vincent, not looking much different than any other tourist. But when the plane lifted off the ground, no tourist ever felt such a profound sense of relief to be leaving, to have faced the possibility of death by hanging, and to now be free.
Yes.
The Fletchers' journey began more than a year and a half ago in Florida. Preparing for at least a year-long sailing adventure, Jim and Penny talked with optimism in a home video, hoping that their troubled marriage would be strengthened.
We can stay together 24 hours a day and still be in love and still get along and still sail well.
Jim, the president of a West Virginia mining company, had taken early retirement. For both he and Penny, this was a 3rd marriage.
It will force us to utilize our God-given talents to figure problems out and solve them.
They worked their way south, ending up anchored off the small island of Bequia, part of the island nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That's where their life began to darken. Heavy drinking, public bickering, and wild behavior by Penny, including one nasty bar fight, was earning them the reputation of rich, ugly Americans. They had so alienated the local population that when a popular water taxi driver named Jolly Joseph was murdered with a .22 slug in his chest, Jim and Penny Fletcher, the last known people to see him alive, were charged with murder. It would become the most controversial legal case in the history of St. Vincent since its declared independence from Great Britain in 1979. The 2 Americans were held in what looked like medieval prisons. The men's facility was designed for 150 inmates and held 400. In his crowded cell, Jim had a bucket and a hole in the floor for a toilet. It took 4 months before they were granted a preliminary hearing in February. The Fletchers had owned a .22 caliber pistol, which they claimed had been stolen. But the type of ammunition they had on their boat did not match the slug taken from the body.
Get out of this place with the things then.
There were also rumors that Penny had an affair with the murdered man, but only rumors. The young magistrate who heard the case ruled that there was enough evidence to bind the Fletchers over for trial.
It's a travesty of justice.
Their lawyers were stunned.
I'm bewildered, frankly.
Sandra Ingram, a representative of the U.S. Embassy who monitored the hearing, wrote a scathing confidential memorandum to the U.S. ambassador. She wrote there was not one scintilla of physical evidence, that the case looked to her like a witch hunt that was being influenced by higher authority. A fair trial, she wrote, was unlikely. Jim and Penny went back to prison, struggling with depression.
I didn't expect anything less of this government.
The failure of the magistrate to throw out the case and the growing possibility that Jim and Penny might face the gallows touched off an intensified political campaign by the Fletcher family back in the U.S. Jim's elderly parents and his daughters by previous marriages demanded President Clinton intervene.
We must let the officials in St. Vincent know the whole world is watching.
Last night, I went and stood on the top of a hill, and we stood under the comet and under the stars and under the moon, and we prayed to God that there was enough power on that hill with us last night that we can make this nightmare stop.
The Right Honorable Sir James Mitchell, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
In May, President Clinton did raise the issue at a Caribbean summit with St. Vincent's Prime Minister James Mitchell. Clinton was assured that the Fletchers would get a fair trial. But complicating the case were allegations of bribery and corruption within the government of St. Vincent, allegations the Prime Minister dismissed.
That's rubbish. I know nothing about that.
As the months passed, Jim steadily lost weight, telling his family he feared he could not go on. Penny struggled with gynecological infections and a diagnosis of a precancerous condition that authorities refused for months to treat. As pressure mounted on the government of St. Vincent, so did resentment by the Prime Minister and many citizens. Resentment of the U.S. government and American news organizations that were covering the Fletcher case.
It's an American attitude. It's a big stick policy, that has been going on since America became America, whereas they extend their power, they're imperialistic, and they want to control as much of the world as possible.
As the actual trial was about to begin, the government of St. Vincent asked for a 3-month delay and filed charges of criminal libel against one of the Fletcher's attorneys and their hometown newspaper in West Virginia. The apparent tactic was to discourage outside coverage of the trial and to disrupt the defense team. But a high court judge swept aside government objections, forcing the prosecution to lay out its case over 7 days. After hearing the evidence, the judge stopped the trial and set Jim and Penny free.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Sears.
Were set free. They were up on a hillside looking out at the 2 prisons where they had been held for 9 months. The women's prison was on the hill.
I don't ever want to go back up there again.
The men's facility was down in the city. From his cell, Jim said he could never see the sun or the moon or the stars.
Well, there were 18 of us to a room, except on bad nights like Fridays and Saturdays. They might have 20 in there.
I have roach bites on my legs. And the rats that come up out the floorboards. And we stuff paper down. They have these big spaces between the boards and the rats. You'd actually see their heads, come up while we were awake and before we go to sleep at night.
The gallows, which ABC News was not allowed to photograph, was next to the women's prison.
They can hang 3 people actually at one time if they wanted to.
Penny said one day the inmates were forced to exercise right next to the gallows.
I actually protested. I didn't think it was right of them, to rub it in my face, knowing that we were here on a capital charge.
But for both of them, despite the dismal setting, they left friends behind the walls.
I think about the women who are still there.
Yeah, and I think about my friends, and I'll do what I can to help.
Mm-hmm.
And you did have friends?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Those girls were crying this morning with me out there. wanting me to be out.
Though the Fletchers are now back in Florida, life in a St. Vincent cell block will not soon be forgotten by either one of them.
The first thought that crossed my mind every morning was that I am a prisoner and I am being held for the commission of a capital crime. It's a rather depressing way to start your day.
In your first morning out of St. Vincent, what happened?
Well, I woke up at my regular time, and I was actually in a bed rather than on a wooden cot, and just the realization that I had been delivered was overwhelming.
Penny, you woke up this morning?
Very happy, very happy. I had a pillow, had blankets, soft bed, and people who loved me.
The nightmare for the Fletchers began immediately after the murder of water taxi driver Jolly Joseph last October. The police told the Fletchers they were not suspects.
Well, we assisted without an attorney, and it got worse and worse.
When did it dawn on you that you might be charged?
There was such a sense of unreality about the whole thing that I don't think until we were actually charged that it sunk in, and even then we kept thinking, this cannot be happening. We are innocent. It was like an Alice in Wonderland kind of a feeling. And for weeks after we'd been in prison, it was still, this is not real. They're going to come and say, hey, this whole thing was a mistake, go home.
Both Jim and Penny say they were always treated at least as well as local prisoners. There were none of the sexual assaults and violence one might find in a U.S. prison.
My relationships with other prisoners were better than I might have expected in an American prison.
Jim conformed to prison life, did not buck the system, learned to live with the sweltering, cramped confinement. Penny said she fought it every step of the way.
Why should I conform? Why should I have to lower myself to the standards that these people were going to set for me?
But you're being accused of murder.
That didn't matter. I still held my head up, and I still fought for what I thought. I wasn't going to back down to that.
The low point for Jim and Penny was back in March at their preliminary hearing when a St. Vincent magistrate reviewed the government's case and, despite its obvious weaknesses, ruled that there was enough evidence to go to trial.
I really felt that we had no chance, having had the evidence such as it was or was not, and still having the judiciary pass this on. Those were the darkest times of my imprisonment.
Did you begin to give up hope? Did you feel that?
Absolutely. That was the only time that I really felt suicidal. Certainly the major factor that kept me going was my family. My father made a special trip down to see me, to explain to me that I had to pull myself together.
It keeps millions of Americans glued to their TVs every night. It's not the game show.
When the Fletchers left the courthouse after the judge's ruling, in a carefully worded statement,
we wish only to return to our family and friends.
Jim said he felt no ill will toward the people of St. Vincent.
How is it possible, after being held in prison for 9 months on charges that were thrown out as being so flimsy that they couldn't hold up in the final analysis, that you hold no ill will?
I do not believe that it was the people of St. Vincent who initiated this. I felt all along that this was a political trial rather than a criminal case.
St. Vincent's Prime Minister James Mitchell is from the island of Bequia, where the murder occurred. It was his political constituents who lined up along this shoreline and pointed angry fingers at the Fletchers.
And it was his choice, I believe, under pressure from people within his own electoral constituency to prosecute this case and to push it beyond the limits of any evidence. Had it not been for the efforts of the American media and of our families to ensure that we were given a fair trial and a fair hearing, I am quite certain that the outcome would have been death.
Do you think you really did receive a fair trial?
Yes.
Was this...
Yes, I do.
You were in prison for 9 months. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that was fair at all, but Vincent should stay in a lot longer. We were lucky to get a trial in 9 months.
The prosecutor never had an opportunity to cross-examine you on the stand, and the jury never had an opportunity to hear you.
No.
Did you kill Jolly Joseph?
No, I did not.
Did you have an affair with Jolly Joseph?
No, that was the absolute furthest thing from my mind, yes.
How much responsibility do you feel you both bear for the trouble that you got into? In the months, in the weeks before this murder, you became two of the most unpopular people on the island of Bequia.
We never knew we were unpopular until this happened.
Penny, you were involved in a bar fight, which was talked about in the trial. You were involved in several difficult screaming incidents.
Yes.
Both of you were drinking heavily at the time.
Well, I certainly would not sit here and say that our behavior was stellar. However, I think the last I heard, drinking rum was not a crime in the Caribbean.
Jim, your two eldest daughters hugged you after the verdict and broke into tears of happiness that you were free. And they have been saying for months the one thing they hope that happens after this ordeal is that you stop drinking.
Yes.
Is that something that can happen?
Yes, it certainly is. And that is my intention.
When we go to islands now, wherever we go, you know, the drinking is going to have to be at a halt or at a minimum. You know, you just can't, it's, yachting people do it.
But not stop.
Oh, yeah, I think stopping is a better idea. And to me, boating, you know, you can do boating without drinking.
You were essentially, for 9 months, you were both in detox. For 9 months, you didn't smoke, you didn't drink, you were clean as a whistle. And now you're out.
I'm smoking.
And you're back to drinking already.
No, I had a wine.
Did the 9 months help?
For me, it did, yes. And, but it came as no shock to me that I was an alcoholic. I've known that for some time.
Are we going to see Jim and Penny sailing in the Caribbean in the months ahead? Are you finished with sailing?
We haven't finished the trip yet.
You're going to go back and sail some more?
Oh, absolutely.
We'll not let this, no, we can't let this stand in the way. That it's like beating us, you know, beating us to a point to where, you know, they would make us so afraid to come back. And we should have no fear of going back. We didn't do anything wrong.
There are certain things that hopefully we've learned concerning our own behavior. And we do accept the fact that we need to modify that.
Jim Fletcher celebrated his 50th birthday in prison. Penny is still struggling with medical problems, most recently unpredictable fainting spells which have gotten worse. She was admitted to the hospital this morning. For the two people who left St. Vincent hours after being freed from prison, the worst part of the nightmare is over. But for both of them, the struggle to find a new life that is different from the old is just beginning.
Late today, the government of St. Vincent sent Nightline a written statement calling U.S. coverage of the Fletcher case, quote, manifestly unfair. The statement denied any charges of government interference in the judicial process, saying that allegations of official corruption are totally unsubstantiated. Finally, the statement said St. Vincent remains a prime vacation spot for Americans, and that, quote, just as our courts have acquitted the Fletchers, we would implore your court of public opinion to acquit our nation of the false charges to which we have been subjected over these last few months. I'll be back in a moment.